Dr. John Ashton, really good to have you with us on Cut Through today. Thank you for coming in.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
I want to start with a question in your area of expertise. What is the biggest lie that our culture tells young men about alcohol?
I think it is that you're not a man unless you can drink. It's interesting. I had a personal experience right in this area. So I'd made the decision not to drink as a teenager. It was just after my dad had died. And I knew that back then that alcohol damaged the brain. Now, I grew up in a family that occasionally we had a celebrations. My parents would drink a little bit of alcohol. Maybe they'd been given a bottle of wine or something. But I made that decision then because I saw what it did to people. And so when I went to uni, of course, it was fashionable afterwards to go down the pub and have these philosophical discussions. And I remember one time sitting with my mates and I had my drink. I can't remember, it was a lemonade and orange juice or something. And I remember this guy walked past and said, "Hey, aren't you a man yet?" And it was great in that my friends supported my position and they said, "Leave John alone, he doesn't drink, right?" And I thought that was so cool. My mates, some of them drank, a couple of them didn't, but they accepted my position and that showed they were true friends. They never pressurised me. But way back then, this is in the 1960s, that was the pressure that people looked at. You weren't a man unless you can drink. And yet in actual fact, that's further from the truth because later on when I started researching in this area, we find that alcohol causes enzymatic changes in the body that actually suppresses testosterone production, the male hormone. So that's the lie. The lie is if you drink, you're a man. No, if you drink alcohol, it actually makes you less of a man. Now, young guys, of course, when they're young, their body produces a lot of testosterone, so they don't notice the effects so much. But as they get older, those effects become more pronounced. And even by the time they get into their 40s, alcohol is probably the main cause of impotence in men 40 and onwards. And then once they get into their 50s and this sort of thing, particularly if they've drunk steadily for a long period of time, the changes, because what happens is at high levels, the alcohol actually stimulates the body to convert testosterone into estradiol, the female hormone, which is why some of these older men begin developing breasts, they lose hair, develop feminine patterns of fat deposition. So that's the lie. The alcohol industry wants to think, we're this big, tough, buff guy. And when we're young, we can get away with a bit. But later on, it catches up with us.
That's fascinating. So alcohol blunts your manhood.
Definitely.
That's fascinating. I've never heard it put that way before.
And it's a scientific fact.
Yeah.
We understand the biochemistry of what is going on.
Yeah. If alcohol was invented today, with everything we know scientifically about alcohol and its impact, do you think it would be legal?
Well, if we use alcohol in the laboratory, we have to use a fume cupboard. So it's now known to be a class 1 carcinogen. And this is really sad because, I have close friends whose children took up drinking alcohol, and particularly women folk are very susceptible to alcohol. And to see these young women now developing breast cancer as a result of that. And of course, and so alcohol is definitely linked, we know now, to a number of cancers.
Now, you made the commitment not to drink at a very young age.
Yes.
But you've also gone on to do a lot of research in the area of alcohol,
yes,
as well as other areas around chemistry and food. Through your research, what was the biggest aha moment for you as you researched alcohol?
I think, as we've already talked about, the fact that alcohol stimulated the production of enzymes that converted testosterone to estradiol. That was certainly wow, because that, as you started off in this conversation, that's the big myth, men drink alcohol, coming of age when people turn 21 back in my day, or 18 now, that was what you did. You could now drink. The other thing is too, I saw alcohol destroy the lives of my peers. These were my mates that were very good friends. So I'll talk about a couple of them. So one was Stephen. Now, I went to a very large high school, well over 1,000 students. I was in the A class. I was in the top 5 students in maths. I topped every science exam, I think, all through high school and in the top maths. And so there was a girl who came top. The boy who always came second was Stephen. And he was good at both science and the arts and languages. He was very clever.
That's a rare gift.
The next guy down was a guy, he and I swapped places. He usually came third, I usually came fourth. His name was Terry. And then the next guy, David, he usually came fifth. It's very interesting that when we went to uni, Stephen started taking up drinking, and there was a guy there who was came from quite a well-off family. He used to throw parties just before exams. Now, he was a very big young man, quite a bit overweight, and what we need to understand is, of course, that the more water and volume that your body is carrying, and men carry more water in their body, for example, than women. So there's more water to dilute the alcohol, as opposed to Stephen, who is fairly slim build, sort of like me. And Stephen didn't hold his alcohol well. And he eventually became an alcoholic. He lost his Commonwealth scholarship, dropped out of uni, was working as a labourer. Then one day got into a fight with, I think it was a sailor over a woman, broke a glass and stabbed the guy in the face and ended up being sent to jail for 10 years. I lost track of him then. But here was a guy who could have had a brilliant career, right? Now, if we go to Terry, he went to Sydney Uni, was doing medicine. After a party, big party, second year, got his girlfriend pregnant. He did the right thing, but he pulled out of medicine and ended up doing teaching. So, but I caught up with him a few years ago after 50 years, and he and his wife are still married at this time. But I just think that changed his life. He could have been an excellent physician because he had a lovely personality, very smart, very sharp guy. And when I think of the other guy who didn't drink, that was David. He was a Baptist guy. He ended up being a professor of psychology at the University of Melbourne. So we can see the difference, and I could tell other stories, but these guys were my mates. We hung out together through high school, and then afterwards at uni for a while, till we all sort of gradually, went different ways. And they were nice guys. They were normal, nice guys, and very clever. And as we can see, two of them had their lives affected. And as I said, I could tell other stories of guys that I knew, but not as well as those guys. They were my mates. We hung out together.
Can you give us a bird's eye view of your career over the last decades?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I studied chemistry at the University of Newcastle and graduated in 1969. I topped chemistry there, won the prize. Then I won the Toxide Research Fellowship to the University of Tasmania, worked as research fellowship there through 70, 71, 72, 73. Then in 74, I was appointed a lecturer in mathematics and physics at the Hobart Technical College. A few years later, I was appointed state coordinator of science courses for technical and further education. Then I left there in the beginning of 1988 and joined Sanitarium as their chief chemist. Then in 2000, I moved to the position of strategic research manager for Sanitarium. In 2011, I was appointed a full professor of applied chemistry at RMIT University, and also a associate professor at Victoria University in the biomedical science area.
Yeah, you're a scientist, You're a published author, dozens of books, and close to 100 professional articles as well.
Yeah.
You spent a lot of time at Sanitarium. And some of our listeners may not be familiar with Sanitarium, one of Australia's most trusted brands. Weet-Bix, Up and Go. You've led the research, the science team there. Give us a snapshot into what happens in your role and in your work at Sanitarium behind the scenes.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So whenever you're making foods, people think that making food's fairly simple. Well, it's not. When you're making something, particularly, it has to be self-stable and nutritious over a long period of time. So we do a lot of research in understanding food chemistry. We also do a lot of research understanding nutrition. There's a lot to nutrition in terms of bioavailability. How bioavailable are certain nutrients? For example, in our plant-based milks, we fortify with calcium, so it's equivalent to dairy milk. But does that calcium get into the body the same way? Is our body able to utilise that calcium the same? And so, for example, we've done studies showing that, yes, that's exactly right. And so things like this to make sure that our products are delivering what we claim they deliver.
Now, you're a scientist, you're a professor, you're an author. Your main area of expertise has been chemistry.
Correct.
But your PhD was in epistemology. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Two different things. What is epistemology and what was your interest in that area?
Okay, so epistemology is the study of theories of knowledge, how we can know. So how can we actually know something? What are the assumptions that we make that underpin the conclusion that we come to that we actually know something? So a lot of people think they know things, but that isn't necessarily so what they know. So it's looking at ways that we can actually know something. Yeah.
How has that impacted your work as a scientist and more specifically your research into alcohol?
Right, okay. So biomedical systems are extremely complex. And so most scientific research based on principle of reductionism, and that is that you divide things up into little parts and then you add them together. But in biological systems, that doesn't apply, whether it's environmental or human, medical, in that we have effects called synergy. In other words, two effects combined. In those cases, 1 plus 1 doesn't necessarily equal 2. 1 plus 1 may equal 3 or more. And the classic example of this is that you can have two birds together, right? And you think you've got two birds. But if you happen to combine a male and a female bird, after a while you might have 5 birds. So this is because you have synergistic reactions that you can't necessarily predict from just observing one bird. And so this is one of the areas where the study of epistemology and theories of knowledge, how we can best know, comes into very important in understanding and trying to predict outcomes in biological or medical systems.
Yeah. Coming back to Sanitarium, what's been the most interesting, exciting, innovative project that you've had the chance to work on?
Oh, wow. Okay. So we've done lots of really exciting programs in Sanitarium in a lot of different areas. I think some of the ones have been, in terms of easy terms, being able to develop gluten-free products for people. So our gluten-free Weet-Bix was a world first in that area. That was pretty exciting. Also, the studies that we've done to understand the bioavailability of nutrients such as B12 and calcium in our products, and showing, yes, these are highly bioavailable. Matter of fact, for example, B12 in our so-called beverage is more bioavailable than the B12 in vitamin tablets, this sort of thing. So these have been, pretty exciting outcomes to discover.
Yeah, and some really exciting products. I mean, Weet-Bix is well known, but Up and Go is a more recent product, and that's had a huge impact on the breakfast market in Australia and around the world.
Yes, it's a really good product, an excellent source of protein, because it's interesting, it's a combination of dairy and soy proteins, and studies have shown that after exercise, that combination of proteins is ideal for muscle recovery. And so that product, of course, was formulated before that research came out, so it's pretty exciting.
Now, breakfast liquids, breakfast foods are a world apart from alcoholic beverages.
Sure.
What was the driving passion, force behind you doing so much work, research, writing on alcohol when it really hasn't been the major focus of your professional career, of your work?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I saw how alcohol had destroyed the lives of some of my close friends when we were at uni. And also I saw the impact of alcohol in the community. Violent crime, murders, particularly domestic violence. It's played a huge role in domestic violence. I knew of families that were affected that way. And it just seems so morally wrong that this was continuing on, and particularly in Indigenous cultures.
If I asked AI, if I Googled alcohol, there are countless articles, videos, testimonials that a glass of wine is good for you. It has significant health benefits. What does alcohol actually do to the brain? And why are some scientists even suggesting that, a glass of wine may be good for you?
Okay, so they pick on wine because, particularly if it's red wine, it's high in particular antioxidants that may help protect against the oxidation of cholesterol and the build-up of plaque in arteries, these sort of areas. But that has to be balanced out against the fact that alcohol itself is a carcinogen. How alcohol works, of course, on the brain is that our brain requires oxygen that's carried in the blood. Now, alcohol is a very small molecule, and alcohol binds as transferred through the cell and actually blocks the uptake of oxygen. So alcohol affects the brain much the same way as oxygen deprivation
It's
affects the
suffocating you.
brain. Yes, and so that's why, glue sniffing, early pilots going very high with very thin air would suffer the same effect. So alcohol deprives the brain of oxygen. Yeah.
To someone without a deep scientific background, what does that actually do to you? How does it impact you? How does it impact your decision making?
Oh, yes. Well, it greatly affects your decision making because it means that you have less brain cells available to utilise to making decisions. So essentially it slows our reactions down because fewer brain cells means it's longer for the body to process information. And what happens under extreme conditions is that the body will often go into a defence mode because it can't understand the inputs that it's coming in, and that's when people begin lashing out perhaps at intimate partners and this sort of thing when they're under the influence of alcohol and do things that they wouldn't normally do.
How does that loss of control work? People get drunk and they say, I did that under the influence. I don't remember it. It wasn't me. What's happening? How do we understand that in really simple, basic terms?
Well, what's happening is that their brain has been affected, as I just said, in that they can't identify and process normal inputs, whether they be visual or audio inputs that they're getting in. And so the brain goes back to a primitive defense mechanism. I'm in danger, I have to defend myself.
So it's like a knee-jerk reaction, an involuntary reaction.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily involuntary because some people, not everybody does react that way. It just depends a little bit on their personality. But most people actually, if they are intoxicated enough, will go to an immediate, very defensive, aggressive position because this seems to be a primordial tuning that we have as a preservation mechanism.
Okay. How would I know if I end up being more violent? Is there a way to predict those that end up more violent and those that just hibernate and sort of curl up in a corner?
Look, I'm not sure on that because I think alcohol can really change people. And it probably depends on which part of the brain is at that time more damaged by alcohol.
Now, a lot of young men say that alcohol helps them relax. They are able to release their inhibitions. It makes them more social. And all of those things are good things. How would you reflect on that?
Well, that's true. That happens, and at very low levels of alcohol. That does have the effect, a mood enhancing effect. And that's what perhaps drives the addiction. But further increases in alcohol consumption, then the mechanism switches over to more depression as less parts of the brain become available to function.
So a light beer or a bit of alcohol here and there adds value or does more damage?
The big issue is that no one knows whether they're going to become addicted or not. And the other factor that I take into it is that there certainly are some people that are able to hold their alcohol more, like the friend, one of the guys at uni that I knew used to throw parties before exams. He was a very big guy. It took more alcohol to influence him, whereas somebody who's thin is going to be influenced more easily, more quickly. And I think we don't know whether we have the genes that are going to make us susceptible to alcohol addiction.
That's how I find out I'm one of those lucky people who has strong genes. I'm not susceptible to alcohol addiction. Does it have other negative impacts? Is abstinence well worth it? Or if my body is designed to take it, I'm okay?
Well, alcohol is class 1 carcinogen. So it's going to predispose us to cancer. We know particularly, for example, in women folk, even just one drink a day leads almost to 100% risk of breast cancer. In men, because men are often exposed to higher levels of environmental toxins, so it's going to enhance those factors. But it also is linked to heart disease, to strokes and so forth. Yeah.
So even if I can hold it, party well, and remember what happened the next day, I still have a much higher chance of significant ailments, illnesses, cancer, and other things as well.
Oh, definitely.
What about sleep, recovery, energy levels? How does that impact the average person, whether they can hold alcohol or not?
Alcohol, of course, is a source of energy, and so that's why people can often say they party all through the night. So it's providing energy in that sense, but again, consequently, you have the side effects. So one of the things is we need to look at how alcohol is metabolized in the body. So alcohol is metabolized in the body by initially being converted to acetaldehyde. Now, acetaldehyde is a toxin to the body, and that's the effect that causes the hangover. If it stays in the body too long, it's quite a dangerous poison, can damage DNA from memory, I think. And so the body then has to convert that acetaldehyde into acetic acid, which is then excreted.
Would there be any good reason to have a beer, have a glass of wine, drink socially, casually?
I guess everybody's going to give themselves an excuse of that, but if you really want good health, the best way is to totally abstain from alcohol, because even the smallest amount of alcohol is going to affect your brain. And so what, in effect, you say, okay, it makes you feel more relaxed and less inhibited. So what that means is that your guard is already down to read cues that may in actual fact be harmful to you. Also, it's going to make you more susceptible to make the decision to have another drink. And a lot of people fall for that and then end up getting themselves into a situation that they didn't plan to get into initially. But once you take that first drink, you open yourself to being more susceptible to being influenced by others.
Is there some other way that a young person could experience more calm, release their inhibitions without alcohol and without the negative side effects? You're a food scientist. Is there something else they can drink or eat or do to experience some of those calming social benefits of alcohol?
Well, I think there are heaps of other nice drinks that you can have, particularly fruit
Up and
juices. Well, you could have an up and go. Yes, up and go would be a good one. Particularly something like pomegranate juice or, a dark grape juice. And there are more and more beverages that are being produced now, even non-alcoholic beers and these sort of things. Matter of fact, the non-alcoholic beer market is increasing. In the United States, young people or less young people are drinking beer now. I think more people are definitely becoming aware that alcohol can be a really serious trap. And you can either choose non-alcoholic beers, or you can choose other things such as pomegranate juice that deliver functional health benefits that are actually going to enable you to live healthier longer. Yeah.
You touched on it briefly earlier when you mentioned depression, but what is the link between alcohol and mental health?
Oh, very strong link between alcohol and mental health, yeah, because alcohol damages the brain. And also, one of the other things is that I noticed for some news articles that people, professional people are using different drugs, and alcohol plus certain drugs can be deadly. And so that's another factor. If people are drinking alcohol and then, sniffing some of these other drugs, some of those combinations can be fatal, can stop the heart, this sort of thing. And so these things, again, alcohol can often exacerbate the effects of these things. One of the risks with alcohol is it doesn't go through digestion. Alcohol is absorbed directly into the bloodstream through the walls of the stomach. So we don't have to digest it. So
Why is that an issue?
that's an issue because we can become intoxicated very, very quickly. And that then immediately gets to our brain. So, and it can also, alcohol can also act as a solvent and carry other things as well. Now, alcohol is a very small molecule. It mixes very well with water, and it essentially goes to everywhere in our body where water goes. So we're taking that alcohol to everywhere in our body.
It's a toxin, it's a carcinogen, it's a poison.
Yep.
And it can get everywhere in our body.
Everywhere in our body,
Yeah.
yes. Everywhere where there's cells.
When I started uni, I was doing a business and IT degree.
Yep.
And I remember going to class, making some friends. I didn't know anyone in my class. One of them had 1,800 students. I think it was a statistics class. Made some friends. And what I found very quickly is that at the beginning of the class, we'd get there. Within 5 minutes, a lot of my friends would say, this is a boring lecture. It's not interesting. We can get the notes somewhere else. Let's go to the pub. And I was shocked that in the university campus, there were multiple pubs that are open throughout the day, and there were lots of students there not in class. How did we get to this culture where drinking has become not just socially acceptable, but there is pressure to be involved in social drinking and even extreme forms of drinking? How do you think we got here in our generation?
Well, I think probably alcohol, I'm not sure on the pricing of alcohol, possibly it's become more cheaper, but there certainly is a lot of peer pressure now to make alcohol, socially acceptable, and particularly in professional circles as well. It's just something that is passed on from older people. It's known as a social lubricant. And a lot of people find that too. They find that when they drink alcohol, as you pointed out, they become less inhibited. Therefore, they feel they're more socially accepted, this sort of thing. So it can be hard to be a non-drinker in that situation, actually. I remember reading an article that was published in a newspaper about a young person who said, well, I don't mind drinking, but I'm being forced to drink till I get drunk. And if you don't do that, you're sort of considered an outsider. And I think this is an interesting aspect. I have another friend who chose not to drink, and people would, in the hotel, other people would see him not drinking and begin threatening him and challenging him to a fight, to the point that he went and learnt karate. So this is a really interesting reaction. It's sort of like the fox that cut off his tail fable, that he went and was telling all the other foxes, oh, it's so good to have you. His tail was caught in the trap from memory, and had to cut it off, and said, oh, it's so good to get rid of that tail. And I think, I don't know whether it's the same thing, but it's sad that this pressure is put on people.
Part of it is a social pressure, but there's also the experience that many young people go through, which is that alcohol provides an escape. Even if I'm drinking on my own, it helps me forget my troubles.
Okay.
It calms me down. How does it have that impact of feeling like you're escaping reality and into some sort of bliss?
Yeah, sure. So never having drunk, I can't really talk on that from personal experience. So obviously it's an effect that alcohol has on the brain. And so, as I said, we know that alcohol across the blood-brain barrier goes to the brain very early on. It's going to affect oxygen uptake. And that's why people have similar effects from other ways that you can reduce your oxygen intake by, sniffing some other substance or, again, at very high altitudes, yeah.
How does less oxygen make you calmer?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I'm not being a brain neurophysiologist. I guess what it's going to do is it's going to be slowing down the rate at which you're processing input. So essentially it's slowing you down. That's why it slows down, for example, your responses when you're driving. Your ability to react to a situation slows down. So I guess if you're in a safe, comfortable environment, maybe it feels good slowing down. But as I said, I can't speak from personal experience there. Yeah.
You've mentioned earlier briefly that some young men, or in some parts of the world, the alcohol culture is decreasing. Why do you think at least part of this generation is starting to turn away from alcohol?
Oh, I think that they see the effect that alcohol has on their mates. I've seen, as I said, in my uni days, two of my close friends who were brilliant students had their careers and lives destroyed by drinking alcohol. And I think one of the reasons I made that decision as a 14-year-old was I can remember my travelling on the ferry and my mum pointing to an older man, unshaven, in old army trench coat, clutching a brown paper bag in the shape of a wine bottle, saying that man there was a great violinist and his career's been destroyed by alcohol. I had relatives whose lives had been destroyed by alcohol, particularly after war. They came back after the war and became alcoholics.
Despite those personal stories, there's still the perception, at least through media, whether it's social media, movies, that drinking is a cool thing to do. Why is there such a big push? Where does that come from to make drinking look appealing, desirable?
Yeah, well, what you say is true. You think of the old cowboy movies and the guy in the bar and he asks for a whiskey and shocks down the whiskey, and I guess that makes him feel more bulletproof, but in actual fact his reflexes are going to be slower. He's less bulletproof. And so I think the bottom line is it's a lie.
Who's pushing that lie?
Well, that lie is obviously, I think it's pushed by people who socially want others to be like them, plus the alcohol industry, of course, itself needs to make more money. Yeah.
And I think that's really important for people to remember.
Yeah, sure.
Industries have a conflict of interest. They're not out there for the good of society. They're out there for the good of their shareholders.
Correct.
And sometimes that aligns with the good of society. Sometimes it doesn't. And there are plenty of examples just in the last few decades of entire industries that have behaved in a very selfish way. And the alcohol industry would be no different. And I think we touched on earlier, a lot of the research about the benefits of a glass of wine fail to appreciate or highlight why red wine has a benefit, and they use that as a blanket statement for the entire industry.
Oh, yes, certainly, yes. And it's very interesting statements that the alcohol industry make. For example, the research studies show that domestic violence is much higher in households where one of the partners is often drunk. Mm-hmm. And then the alcohol industry says, well, alcohol doesn't cause domestic violence. In a way that is, technically correct, but alcohol facilitates domestic violence in that drinking alcohol changes a person's ability. And the other thing is that it is a drug that leads people to lose control of their minds. And I think this is a very important thing. And so that's why certain other drugs we don't allow out in society. Unfortunately, because alcohol traditionally has been used for thousands of years, it's allowed out in our society. But we need to understand too that in certain communities, alcohol is leaving a legacy. So, for example, in certain Indigenous communities, fetal alcohol syndrome is so widespread that babies born with it are considered being born normal. It's not recognised as an abnormality. And this is so sad. But this is, just a statement of what's happening.
It creates significant social issues, health issues, communal issues, and yet it's still heavily promoted because of the self-interest of a particular industry.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And as I've became aware in the late 1990s, when the alcohol industry recognised that a quarter of the population weren't drinking alcohol, in that less than 40% of women drank alcohol, and here's a quarter of the population that's not drinking, their efforts to offer free alcohol to women to get them to come in to bars and then deliberately designing products after research that were more acceptable to alcohol. And the sad part is that within about 5 years of those campaigns here in Australia, the percentage of women drinking alcohol rose from 38% to 78%. So there was a 40% increase in the percentage of women. So that represented a 20% increase in alcohol sales across Australia.
And as we said, it's a catalyst for health issues, for social issues, also economic.
Yes.
The cost to deal with the issues that alcohol creates, whether it's cancer, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's the impact that it has on families, is astronomical. And it's the taxpayers that are footing that bill.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I think some doctors have actually spoken out about this, the overload that occurs in our hospitals on Friday nights and Saturday nights as a result of injuries caused by people, sometimes to themselves, sometimes to others, while they were under the influence of alcohol.
Now, I've got this book here, and you alluded to this earlier, Now, I've got this book here that you alluded to earlier, Uncorked,
Yes.
and it has a lot of the insights that you've shared
Yes.
of the damage, the impact that alcohol has on the brain, on the family, on society. If I am struggling with alcohol and I realize that it's an issue, how do I break that cycle? How do I get out of that?
Sometimes it requires changing friends. If it is a serious issue for you, then you definitely need professional help. And there is professional help available through your GP, and then through programs such as Alcoholics Anonymous. They're very, very good programs that can help people. But I think the main thing is to definitely seek professional help, because it's not easy to deal with. If you are a particular strong-willed person and can make that decision to give up alcohol, the decision has to be to totally give up alcohol. To say that, okay, I'm going to cut back, for most people is very difficult. It's either an all or nothing situation. But it is something to take very seriously, because, the risk of doing harm to a loved one, it might be as innocent as falling asleep at the wheel and killing someone that you love, but you fell asleep because you actually had drunk a little bit too much alcohol. And these are the things that then people have to live with. And as you say, the impact of alcohol, we think of, the alcoholic themselves, but we forget about the impact on a family that loses their breadwinner husband, father, as a result of a drunk driver accident that may not be their fault. Or a workplace accident because someone's come to work that's drunk heavily the night before and doesn't put the guard up on a machine or something like that. There's a lot of injuries like this that don't get into the newspapers, but they have effects, that ramifications down through the family, through children. Children might miss out on a good education or violin lessons where they're gifted, this sort of thing, as a result of financial constraints, etc.
Yeah. And I'd describe having an alcohol addiction as an injury or an illness. If I broke a leg, that's an injury. If I had influenza A or B, that's an illness or a sickness.
Sure.
And for all of those things, I go get help.
Yeah.
And that's normal. Sometimes there's a bit of stigma around getting help with an alcohol addiction, but I think we should look at that as I've got an injury, I've got an illness,
Yes.
and I'm going to get professional help, whether it's my doctor or a support group, because I need some support, I need some help to get me out of the predicament that I'm in. And I'd encourage anyone going through that to take it seriously. If it's not something you've been able to overcome on your own, which most people won't be able to, get the help that you need.
Oh, yes, definitely. That is really so important because alcohol is very, very subtle. As I said, the long-term biochemical effects that it has on our body gradually weakens the system, in the longer term, makes us susceptible, particularly as we get older then, to other infirmities being accelerated. But the other thing is to the social implications that we may not be aware of. And also the example we set for others, the fact that we drink may then make someone else feel that it's okay to drink, and that person may have the genes that make them very susceptible to alcohol. Yes. And I think that's something else. In the book there, we argue that there's a duty of care that is being overlooked, really, in terms of alcohol. There's a massive duty of care that is being overlooked and being ignored because alcohol is damaging our community. Australia has a population of, 25 million or something like that. But we forget that millions of people have suffered violence or sexual abuse by someone under the influence of alcohol. So it's not one or two people or 100 people, millions of people in our small population. And I dare say it's going to be similar in other countries, particularly, Western countries where alcohol is consumed. We're going to find that millions of people have been severely affected, some of them mentally affected so that they can't have a normal interpersonal relationship with people. Some of them have been physically injured to the point that they've been handicapped in some way for the rest of their life, or they've had their education thwarted in some way that has meant they haven't been able to reach their full potential. The impact of alcohol is astronomically huge. We measure it in terms of billions of dollars, but if actually we measured the loss of productivity and the lack of development and it spreads just so widely, it's trillions of dollars in small economies like Australia. And this is where I think I feel very, very strongly about it. We're not talking about a dozen people being injured. We're not talking about 100 people killed in a landslide. We're talking about millions of people whose lives have been affected and are now expected, okay, toughen up, live with it, that needn't have been. If more people made the decisions to not drink, thousands of lives would be saved. And if everybody did, millions of lives would be impacted.
Alcohol is a destructive drug.
Definitely.
And our government and a lot of Western governments take a very hard line against hard drugs, and rightly so. Yeah. A lot of governments, and ours especially in Australia, I think took the lead on this, took a very strong stance on cigarettes, on nicotine, the packaging, the advertising, and that's had a significant impact on reducing how many young people are smoking. And I'm sure there's a long way to go, but at least it's made an impact. There doesn't seem to be the same concerted effort to do something about alcohol. There aren't as many conversations, interventions. Why do you think we're accepting the impact of this destructive drug with so little pushback as a society, governments?
I think that's a question you need to ask the individual politicians, Kristen, because obviously these people themselves drink alcohol, they enjoy it. Some of them obviously can't control it. We have seen pictures of politicians and particularly their aides and this sort of thing, drunk in compromising situations and so forth as a result of it. But still they go back to it. And I think it demonstrates the addictive power that alcohol has on the mind. and it becomes an ingrained social behaviour. It becomes, a learned behaviour as well. So that's another thing. Not only does alcohol impact our brain chemically, but also it appears that we begin doing social behaviours, so we develop these neural pathways that are reinforced, that becomes part of our behaviour that we see as normal. And this is sad. It's something that has to be interrupted very early or deliberately interrupted through a program.
And we've banned other hard drugs. I'm not sure if we'll be able to ban alcohol. I know there was Prohibition in America a century or two ago, and that doesn't seem to work. But I definitely think we can do a lot better in educating, communicating with young people, having an impact on how alcohol is advertised, how it's placed in media. So it's definitely something we as a society need to take more seriously, because I think collectively its impact is greater than all of the other hard drugs and cigarettes put together. More people do it, it impacts more lives than any other drug.
I think I would challenge you when you said that the prohibition didn't have an effect. That, again, is alcohol industry propaganda.
Because there you go. They got to me. They got to me.
Yeah, they did. There was a very interesting book that was written on this. And essentially when we looked at that period of prohibition, sure, we had Al Capone, we had the gangsters, we had a lot of corruption, this sort of thing. But domestic violence rates and a lot of other things were very, very low. There was a lot less crime. And that certainly changed once it was relaxed. And I forget when it was now, whether it was just before the war, just after the war, I can't remember. But there was certainly evidence that the prohibition was where people didn't like it. And there were a lot of people, that became the bootleggers and so forth. And a lot of publicity is given to this, right? But in actual fact, when you looked at the number of people that were actually impacted by alcohol, it was far less.
That's incredible.
Was far less, but it was something people didn't want to do.
Yeah.
Right? And I think this comes back to the fact that we need discipline. Otherwise, we tend to hurt ourselves.
Perhaps we have you back and have a longer conversation on prohibition and maybe look at some of the policy things that governments could consider. I want to switch tack a little bit. Your first book, or one of your first books, was called Hidden Hazards. It was written in 1991, more than 3 decades ago, when many people didn't have significant concerns about technology. But yet 35 years ago, you wrote a book saying technology has incredible benefits, but there are also some things to be wary of. What made you write that book? What created that interest that really was way ahead of its time?
Well, there were certain areas that I was really concerned about. One was water fluoridation, because during my chemistry at the University of Tasmania, my postgrad work there, we were certainly alerted to the very harmful effects of fluoride. And once, of course, you take a fluoride salt into the stomach, it becomes hydrofluoric acid, which is a very dangerous substance. So I was very concerned about that. And there were a number of other issues that I thought we haven't really looked at, the impact. We use so much in terms of artificial light, which is very different to sunlight. We know that sunlight has a lot of beneficial effects physiologically. And so I was very interested to look at these. A lot of people, there were different specialist papers published, but no one was putting the research together as a book and showing, hang on, we got a big picture here. And essentially the picture is that if we use our technology to work within the guidelines within nature, it works, we have minimal effects. When we use our technology to severely overcome nature, that's when we get into quite serious health effects, particularly, say, in the area of microwaves and this sort of thing.
Why do you think we rush into using technologies before we fully understand their long-term side effects?
Oh, well, it's the same. It's ability to introduce something that people will want and they'll pay money for.
How do we avoid that trap? What could we do better as a society? And I'm thinking of the prevalence of phones the impact that social media has on young people, the AI boom that's upon us now?
I'm very concerned about the impact of screens on our young people and the impact that's having on our brain. Seriously, very, very, very concerned on that. And I would encourage young people to minimise their use of getting information just online all the time, encouraging just reading. From a number of factors, there's a big conversation there. Just input on from our eyes from the type of radiation, but also accustoming our minds to needing a quick fix for everything, constant stimulation, has in effect of making pathways that dumb down our minds. So what happens is we develop preferential pathways of thinking. They become very dominant. They all become dominant to the point that they become addictive. So you find that you'll have young people now take their phone away as some form of discipline and they'll just about go crazy. And this is very serious, very, 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 very serious, because it's impacting our brain behaviour, as well as the microwave radiation if we're holding the phone very close to us. It's very, very, very serious.
Any quick fix comes with long-term cost. And whatever the technology is, I think it's important to have that perspective in mind.
Yeah, we have to have a balance of this, and I think one of the balances is ensuring that we get out in nature more. Take time to take a walk, take time to get out in nature, in greenery, by the sea, things moving naturally, and reading, getting back to old-fashioned reading, a book for mental balance. I think it's very important. And the other thing I think is very important is to physically socialise. Very important to not just be on our phone on social media, but to join a group and get out and meet people and find people with common interests. Not drinking alcohol, of course, is a common interest. I think this is very important. And I think as society we've got to recognise this, and we've got to discipline ourselves in this way. The phone technology is so easy. We can use it for paying our bills, moving our bank statements, finding out what our friends doing, calling our friends, watching a movie, everything. I think we need to step back and think, hang on, what is life all about? I think this is a very important question. What am I here for? Is this really the fulfilment of my life sitting in front of a screen? Is there something better than that? God's given us a body with arms, legs, and this sort of thing. I'm very concerned about it.
Speaking of existential questions, you're an accomplished, very effective and successful scientist, industry leader, university professor, yet you've mentioned God a couple of times. You've expressed that you have a faith. Many people would see a significant clash between someone with a scientific, rational mind and the experience or the exercise of faith. You don't. Why not?
Well, I had an experience of choosing to become a Christian under the influence of a Christian scientist that he was a top researcher at BHP, and just seeing the difference in his life. And then, reading the Bible and discovering what it said, that Jesus was really God, these sort of things, and seeing the change in my own life. But the other thing is too that Christianity underpinned most of the scientific discoveries. The great scientist, one of my science heroes is James Clerk Maxwell, the guy who discovered kinetic theory, that light was a combination of electric and magnetic fields, brilliant mathematician. He was a really great, very, very strong Christian, as was Newton, of course. And there are a lot of scientists today who are Christians. Now, one of the interesting things is when you work in a science circle, a lot of people think that, and there are some very, very hardcore scientists out there who are atheists, and they tend to, they're pushing an agenda that we can't have God anywhere near science in our universities and schools. But there are a lot of Christians out there who are scientists, but they just keep quiet because, they tend to be closed down if they, if they speak up.
Why is the stigma so strong against faith or God in the scientific community?
It's political. It's not based on science. It's not based on scientific knowledge. I had a personal experience in that area. I don't know whether we've got time to recount it. But a few years ago, the Discovery Institute in the US put out a DVD rather, I think it was called the something to do the meaning of life or something like this, and it was all on the evidence for intelligent design in living systems. So they sent out free copies to high schools, and the Biology Teachers Association of Australia put full-page advertisements in Australian newspapers saying, we recommend that you don't show this to your students. It's full of misinformation, right? And there was a lot of debate in scientific circles about this, and essentially there were articles appeared in Chemistry Australia, which is the journal of the Royal Australian Chemical Institute, saying that, we shouldn't be teaching, for example, the evidence for intelligent design in schools, because if we did, we'd have to teach flat earth theory, alien abduction, spoon bending, all this sort of thing. And I thought, this is so wrong. I know a number of top scientists that see overwhelming evidence for intelligent design, and associating us with these other things that are clearly wrong and haven't been proved. So I wrote an article called A Creationist View of the Intelligent Design Debate. It was published as a peer-reviewed article in Chemistry Australia. And there were 3 scientists wrote in who were evolutionists and said this should not be published. The Royal Australian Chemical Institute executive withdrew it from their website. They couldn't redraw the hard copies. So I decided to contact the guys. And because essentially they said, Professor Ashton used made-up arguments, essentially called me a liar. They accused me of using arguments that had been debunked. So I thought, okay, if I'm wrong, you show me where I'm wrong. Now, I put my sources, my references in my articles. It was published actually as a feature article, peer-reviewed. They wrote letters in. The letters were published. I contacted them. 2 of them I didn't get through to, but one guy I did get through to at the university. I introduced myself. I said, I understand you weren't happy with my article. What is the evidence that you have that I'm incorrect? And his reply was, well, we don't have the evidence yet, but we will. So it was a very hollow experience. So it's purely political in that their argument is that, we can't have God. We've got to be able to explain things by natural or physical phenomena. So it's just a purely political position. And actually it is scientism. It's not science, because true science allows for us to have a creator. Science, pure science, is just observing what we actually observe out there and studying the evidence. Scientism is a belief that there is only this physical world and that all observations must be interpreted in terms of this. Yeah.
We did an interview with another guest on creation, design, evolution, atheism, and a number of comments on that interview on social media had this idea that science is evidence-based, faith is not.
All right, yeah, sure.
What would you say to that? Is faith completely without evidence? The idea of intelligent design of a creator, is it fantasy? Someone said, that's just magic. I don't believe in magic.
Sure, okay. Now this is a very interesting question that comes up. And in actual fact, Christianity, of course, is an evidence-based religion. So the fundamental underpinning of Christianity is that Jesus was God, that Jesus was resurrected, that Jesus was translated. So when we look at the evidence for Jesus' resurrection, right, we have eyewitnesses to that account. These eyewitnesses knew what it was like for somebody to be dead. We have the accounts there. Romans were professionals at killing people. That was their job. They lost their life if they didn't do it properly. And we have massive documentation of the evidence, written evidence of those witnesses that have been preserved. We have much more evidence that for Jesus' resurrection than we have for Alexander the Great, for the history of Rome, all these sort of aspects of it. We're relying on, for example, the history of Rome, on documents that were copied about 700 AD, similar for Alexander the Great. Some of these things, there's only one or two documents, whereas we have tens of thousands of documents and inscriptions that have been preserved as evidence for Jesus' resurrection and also for his translation, which is very difficult to fake. And so this is very, very important evidence there. We have factual evidence. I have an encyclopedia of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Bible Prophecy at home, which looks again at the evidence of fulfilled prophecy down through history. So we have a lot of evidence for Christianity as a historical religion, and more evidence than people think of much of the ancient history, that we have no problem at all talking about Alexander the Great and so forth, and Herodotus and these things.
So as a scientist, your faith isn't a blind faith. It's a faith based on historical evidence. It's a faith that asks deep, significant questions, and yet you still come through that and said, there is a reason, there's an evidence-based reason for me to believe.
Oh, very much so. And when I was becoming a Christian, when I would read something in the Bible, I would check things using encyclopedias, looking it up. I also did research looking at the evidence for prophecies and also the evidence in secular literature for fulfilled prophecies and premonitions and so forth. And therefore have argued that there must be a non-material existence, because otherwise it's statistically impossible to know these things. So I look at it from a very scientific perspective initially before I committed myself to God.
As I was listening to your story earlier, what I found interesting is sometimes when people come to God or when they develop a faith experience, it's often in a time of crisis. But from what you were sharing, things were going well for you in your career, financially, but it was a desire for a rational understanding. It was seeing others in your life that were experiencing something positive. And so I think that's a really powerful story. It's not a crutch. Your faith, your Christianity wasn't a crutch to get you out of the ditch. Not. It was as a scientist. You're looking at others and saying they've got something good. Why? And is there a rational reason to accept what they have and to pursue that? And that's a very different perspective that is hard to argue with.
Oh, yes, I believe so, because I wanted to understand a purpose in life. I wanted to lead a fulfilling life, and I recognised that was missing. I also went on to write to other scientists as to why they chose to believe in God and literal resurrection of Jesus Christ. And a lot of those scientists and academics, all with PhDs, all who taught in secular universities, many of them made that decision while they were at university. It wasn't during a time of crisis, but they recognised there's something more, there's something lacking, and I think that's a very, very important reason. And very much the opposite to what is often claimed, religion is just a crutch. It's not that. It's finding fulfillment in life, finding something greater, a greater purpose.
I read an article just this morning, a peer-reviewed scientific article, saying that there is a significant correlation between having purpose and meaning in life and a reduction in anxiety, in depression, in mental health issues. And he was essentially saying, if you have a strong, clear purpose in life, if there is a meaning, if you have a reason to get up out of bed in the morning that is others-centered, that's bigger than yourself, you will have a more fulfilled, more satisfying, more positive life. And science can only give you so much, but faith can give you a reason to live, a purpose, meaning in life.
Oh, yes, very much so. I think quite a number of studies have come out of Duke University in the United States, looking at those people that have faith, have much better health outcomes in a number of different areas as well.
Now, I want to finish with one last health outcome. And it's one that I'm really glad that you've written. You've written a book on the benefits, the value of chocolate. A chocolate a day keeps the doctor away. That almost sounds too good to be true to any chocolate lovers out there. And I've heard enough people warn and encourage a reduction in chocolate consumption for obvious health benefits. But I'm really glad you've written this book. Why is chocolate good for me? What kind of chocolate? How much should I have?
Yes. Well, of course, there's the old adage, 2 minutes on the lips, 2 years on the hips.
I love that.
But the benefits of chocolate come from cocoa, or and particularly cacao from the cocoa bean, and it's very rich in antioxidants. And so essentially the main benefits in chocolate come from eating a dark chocolate. It is a delightful experience because the fat in chocolate melts at body temperature. And so it has that, very smooth, just gradually melting. And of course, with chocolate, as with a lot of things, most chocolates are the milk chocolate. They're only about 10, 12% cocoa. The rest is milk powder and fats. Often cocoa butter, which is not too bad a fat. Most of it is turned to monounsaturates, which are good for us. But the cacao has amazing benefits. So it's very, very high in antioxidants. Continuing research, a large body of research now shows it can help in lowering blood pressure, normalising blood pressure. It's very good for women at the end of their cycle, in that it's a very good source of magnesium, which helps their body produce dopamine, because at that part of the cycle their body is producing less dopamine, and this leads to irritability. It's also a very good biologically available source of iron. So, many good benefits from chocolate. So it's something that we can enjoy. But as with all things, in moderation, sort of 10 to 20 grams of a good dark chocolate a day is quite good. Or the best way, of course, to have it is buy the cacao powder, the raw cacao powder, and just make up a drink with some water and a bit of sweetener or something.
So you heard it here on Cut Through, permission to have some chocolate, but make it dark and in moderation.
Yes, definitely, yes.
I want to finish with one last question that we ask every guest. Thinking of young men out in culture, out in society, especially in relation to our conversation about alcohol, what's one thing you would dare them to do, to take action on in their lives in the next hour to live a more fulfilled, more thriving life?
I think making the decision to become a Christian was the best decision I ever made. And so seriously, I would encourage young men to find a local church group and start going along there. I think the benefits from socialisation being good, and actually find out about Jesus, who Jesus was, and about God our Creator, because I think that underpins everything in a really, really fulfilling life. And the other thing is too, that my view is that this universe, everything we see, is being created by a power outside that universe. But that power is available to us, and that is a loving power. It's a power who loved us. And I think I would encourage young men to come to know that, whom we know through the historical evidence in the Bible came as Jesus. And I think that's the greatest decision that you can make. And I think that can lead to empowering in your life to go on and do great things. So many great missionaries, great scientists, great athletes, great explorers were Christians. And they've been role models. Yeah.
I'm going to summarize what you've shared for our young audience. Be open to Jesus. And in the next hour, Google, AI, search, whatever it is, but go with an open mind. Look at reasons for faith, evidence for faith. You'll find plenty of reasons why not. And there are others who have written why Christianity might be a hoax or it's a myth. But have an open mind and do that sort of search. Hey, is there a reason for faith? Is there a reason to believe in Jesus? What's the historical evidence? Take the next hour just to do a bit of research and go with an open mind. You might be surprised what you might find. And the second thing I really appreciated that is, even if you don't believe, even if you're skeptical, there is power in community. Just give it a try. Just Google what's the nearest church near me and try go there on the weekend and experience the community, ask questions there. I think you'll find people who are very open to be challenged, to be questioned, who are okay with doubts, are okay for you to not accept everything, but you'll experience a lot of joy, a lot of social positive benefits from that. And in time, you might actually find some really strong, powerful, rational reasons to have faith.
I agree.
Is that a good summary?
Great.
Fabulous. Dr. John, it's been really good to have you with us on Cut Through. Appreciate your wisdom and your insights, and I hope we can have some more conversations some other time on some of the topics that we've discussed. Really appreciate having you here.
Thanks. It's been great.